And joining me now is our team of reporters. NBC News national correspondent Gilchrist is in Kerrville, Texas. Also with me is NBC News meteorologist Bill Karins and NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Welcome all. Aaron, let me start with you. What is the latest on the ground, and how can you describe for us the scale of destruction that you've seen?
It is just immense. I mean, Kelly, it really takes your breath away as you come into, we're in Kerrville, but really this whole Kerr County is one that has seen a tremendous amount of devastation. You can see behind me, we're standing in a park, and I'm told by people who've been passing by throughout the day today that this is a park normally where there would be really lush greenery behind me. You would see trees creating a canopy over this walkway here, but instead now you have standing water. The water behind me is not the Guadalupe River. The river is a little bit farther over. There are trees that have been pushed down, snapped in half. The bark has been stripped off. There's plywood up in one of the trees here. You can see just how high the water got when that wall came through this area on Friday morning. Just an indication of how devastating this flooding has been here. At the same time, we've heard from officials here in Kerrville and Kerr County in particular that they are continuing the primary search effort. They are still in the primary search effort, they say. They have indicated that they've recovered 75 bodies here in Kerr County to this point. We just got a few of the nearby counties updating us on some numbers, and so the death toll has surpassed 90 at this point. There is still some hope, though, I think we can say that there's potential for them to find some survivors from the flooding, even though the reality that this was such a catastrophic flooding event and that this is now day 4 since that flooding event. That reality is sinking in for a lot of people. I want you to hear from a couple that I spoke to a bit earlier today as they were coming through this park that they walk through on a regular basis, seeing that so much of it is gone and so much of their community is devastated.
It's really sad because you know what happened and the people who are suffering because of it. It's just such a tragedy, and it's still not over. So
there's still lots of people missing.
Yeah.
You know, in a degree like that.
Now, county officials have said that they have a 62-mile area to search along the Guadalupe River that really runs through a huge portion of central Texas here. And while they're doing that, you may be able to hear some of the heavy machinery that's in the background here. They've been here all day removing debris, and that's a scene that is playing out up and down this river and will be, Kelly, likely for several days.
And I'm sure there's much more to this beyond just the striking images, but I'm sure there are sounds and smells on the ground where you are that are just really making this overwhelming. It is an area known as Flash Flood Alley. And what have you heard from survivors about just how quickly this all escalated?
Well, people were just surprised. Flash Flood Alley, people we've talked to said they are used to flooding. They see the water rise in this area on a regular basis. That's not unusual to them. People who expected the worst thought they might get some water, maybe a little mud in their homes. Instead, you had homes that were ripped off of their foundations and pushed down the river because you had a wall of water that was, the estimates are between 20 and 26 feet high, or higher than the river typically would be. And so that was something that caught so many people off guard. The alerts that went out, we've heard a mixture of people saying that they got some of the alerts. That main one that would have happened about 1 o'clock in the morning, the National Weather Service sent out an alert that would have triggered what we typically think of as the Amber Alert noise that comes on our cell phones. People would have gotten that, assuming that they had service that was operating at that hour. There were a lot of people who were at campsites and tents and in RVs along the Guadalupe River at that time who would have been asleep. We don't know if to a person if they had their alerts turned on, so they would have received that alert. But there are a lot of questions about that part of this situation, Kelly, where people are trying to get their heads around what sort of alerts went out, the timing of those alerts. what additional alerts maybe should have gone out, all questions that people are asking and at some point will have to be answered, although the concentration right now is really on trying to find people who are still missing.
Of course, and that's where it should be. Thank you, Aaron, for bringing us the updates right from the scene. And let me turn now to Bill, who I hope you can explain the difficulty in predicting storms like this one, even for people familiar with flooding.
Yeah, this is an area that gets thunderstorms a couple of times, every week for the most part. And the predictions were for a heavy rainfall event and thunderstorms. The National Weather Service had set up to 7 inches. Well, obviously, we well exceeded that. And even though they thought there could be flooding, no one predicted that there would be this catastrophic level of flooding that rivals the worst ever recorded going back 100 years, 150 years in this region. These are some of the rainfall totals. And there were 2 flash flood events. There was the one that hit the Guadalupe River and the camp there. That was this one that produced about a foot of rain. And then as we went through Friday night, July 4th night into Saturday morning, we had almost 20 inches of rain outside of Austin. And this flash flood was totally separate. You just showed the video there in Georgetown, and that has already taken 12 lives, and there's still another 8 to 10 people missing from that flash flood. So why did we have these back-to-back historic events? We can blame Barry. This storm, about 9 days ago, came into Mexico. That moisture got trapped along the side of the mountains. It was drawn northwards by the wind, and it sat over the top of Texas. Tropical moisture just sitting there. It was just waiting for a trigger. And those thunderstorms started, and it formed this complex of storms that just didn't move. This is a loop over about 12 hours. When you see that red or that pink, that's the extreme rainfall rates right over the Guadalupe River area, and that's what caught everyone. And this happened from about 10 p.m. till about 5 to 7 a.m. in the morning when everyone had just gone to bed, poured all night long. And on top of that, the ground was parched. The river was only at 3 feet deep. You've seen pictures of this river at 29 to 30 feet deep at its max. It was 3 feet. It was dry. There was a drought. And all of this water collected in what they call the foothills of Texas in all these little rivers and canyons. And then it all flowed down the Guadalupe River, Kelly. And that's why everyone just got the timing of it was what cost the most lives, even probably worse than the communication failures, which we can talk about, too.
Certainly the hour of night made a difference in how people responded to this. But are you seeing, understanding now that maybe part of the lapse was in the forecast itself or in the mechanisms to send out alerts to people?
As with everything, Kelly, it's always going to be a little piece of a lot of different things. It rained harder than anyone thought. So that's another piece of it. The alerts and the warnings that went out as the event was unfolding actually happened as they should. I didn't see any problems whatsoever. The watch, which means the ingredients are possible for it to flood, happened 12 to 13 hours before the event. And then the warning went out at 1 a.m. So if the warning goes out, these are the ways you can get the warning. TV and radio, through your mobile device, wireless emergency alerts, or through weather radio. A lot of these people were in RVs, or they're in tents or cabins along the river, or in the case of all the kids at the camps. So a lot of these options weren't available. Plus, it's the middle of the night. No one's watching TV and radio. So a lot of people were going to have to count on either one of two things: NOAA weather radios, which a lot of people don't use anymore, which they still should if you're in a rural area, or wireless emergency alerts. People said they weren't getting these, though. Some of the Wi-Fi, some of the cellular service is very spotty in some of these areas of Kerr County. So people may have been in their tents normally counting on their device to tell them when there's a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm warning, in this case, a flood warning, and maybe they didn't get those because they weren't in good cell phone service. And as far as the kids' camp goes, Kelly, one of the biggest questions I'm dying to know, and I'm sure the parents are going to demand to know, did they have a NOAA weather radio? Were they alerted in the middle of the night? In case you're not familiar with what a NOAA weather radio is, it's almost like the fire alarm in your house. It goes off and it beeps. It wakes you up. So if the camp director had one in their office when this went off at 1 a.m. and then again at 5 a.m., they would have known and could have possibly told all the kids to get to higher ground. The girls' camp did not completely go underwater. About 75% of it is in the flood zone. 25% is not. The upper camp is the higher elevations. That's where helicopters were rescuing the girls from. So if they had known in advance and gotten the weather radio alerts, they could have gotten all those girls up to safe higher ground. But that didn't happen for some reason. We don't know why yet, Kelly. And I'm sure the parents will be demanding it. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to know what happened. Unfortunately, as we know with this tragedy, the director of the camp, who likely was the one to get these, perished trying to rescue some of these girls. So some of these questions we may never know the answer to.
And so many difficult questions. And just to give us a quick snapshot, I understand there is still a threat of weather being an issue in this area.
Yeah, so we had thunderstorms. We were concerned that, there's still active search and rescue going on with hundreds, of drones, aircrafts, people on the ground. These thunderstorms this morning dropped a ton of rain. They were moving west. Here's Kerrville, where the Guadalupe River area is. This is the surge region. They have stayed away. They are weakening. Kelly, I don't think we're going to have to deal with any more problems from flash flooding. And the next week looks dry in Texas. So hopefully we can recover anything that possibly can be found.
Bill, thank you so much for all of those details and a sense of how it unfolded. Let me turn now to Yamiche. And I was certainly struck by the tone at the White House briefing today and the way that officials have come out defending the administration's federal response to these terrible floods in Texas and the potential for a presidential visit to the region, which is something we would expect. What is your takeaway of how the Trump administration is responding?
Well, Kelly, I think you're right to really point out that the tone here was striking from the White House. The White House press secretary really in a defensive posture today. She came out saying that any sort of questioning of staffing or resources that the National Weather Service had, or any sort of critique that would place blame on the president and the cuts that DOJ, the Department of Government Efficiency, have made to the National Weather Service, that they're just ridiculous and really politicking. So the White House here is saying that the National Weather Service had everything that they needed in order to give out the proper and ample warnings to people. They're also saying that the president is looking at possibly going to Texas on Friday. The president said probably Friday, but nothing has been finalized. And as you know, Kelly, these presidential trips take a lot of resources. So in the past, presidents have been cautious about going to natural disaster areas because it means that there's going to be first responders and all sort of resources that need to go into a presidential trip. So it's still TBD on when President Trump will actually be going down to Texas, though the president has been saying that he's making all the resources of the federal government available to Texas in this time of need, Kelly.
And they can take their time to sort out when it's appropriate. Obviously, there's still so much action that is taking place. You mentioned the DOJ cuts, and certainly prior to these storms and the hurricane season, there was a lot of strong words from the administration across the president and the cabinet about the need to have cuts in some of these federal agencies, and a belief that a lot of what they were doing was not delivering for people in various communities when things happen. In terms of DOJ cuts, are they drawing any questions about the future of resources to these agencies, whether it's FEMA or whether it's the weather-related agencies, and what they will need going forward?
Yeah, well, we've heard from local Democratic officials in Texas, as well as Senator Schumer, both of them and a number of other officials on the Democratic side, saying that they want an investigation to see if any staffing cuts that were carried out by DOJ or the Trump administration, whether or not they had any impact on Texas's ability to warm and have ample staffing needed in this flood situation. The other thing that you bring up is that President Trump has hinted and at times said outright that he wants to get rid of FEMA, which is, of course, a big agency that helps in natural disasters. FEMA's on the ground right now in Texas, and they also do things like go to hurricanes and other places to help states deal with disasters. And the White House press secretary was asked specifically, is the president thinking about rolling back its plan to shut down FEMA or strip away resources to FEMA? And all she would say was that the president wants states to do as much as they can and even more, but she would not answer the question directly. And that tells me that the president is not really moving off of the idea that FEMA could be done away with, though, of course, that's striking because you see in Texas there are these heartbreaking stories, and it is the federal government and FEMA that is helping people, Kelly.
It was very notable that she was asked more than once about his position on that, and she did not embrace the position he has publicly stated before. So that is definitely a space for us all to watch. And bringing up FEMA makes me want to turn to Julia now and to get a sense of what you think is critical here in terms of how FEMA uses money for things like this kind of circumstance. And you've been doing a lot of the reporting related to cuts they have made and so forth. So what is the picture?
That's right. Well, certainly from where Aaron sits, so much is being handled locally. But FEMA, of course, is our National Emergency Management Agency administration, and it has really come under the crosshairs of this administration. And in fact, it took a real last-minute maneuvering right before hurricane season for the current acting head of FEMA to keep on 2,600 employees that were about to be let go. And those are the people who are brought on seasonally every year to respond on the ground to incidents just like the ones that we're seeing in Texas. So those were kept. But at the same time, you have Trump saying he wants to eliminate FEMA. You have the former head of FEMA being fired one day after he told The Hill he didn't think it was in the best interest of the American people to eliminate FEMA. But the overall plan of the Trump administration, and this is one that does align with some other Republican administrations' beliefs to downsize the federal government and the role of FEMA, was to give more responsibility to the states to build their own coffers in terms of how to respond to natural disasters and to try to cut back on what the feds do. A lot of people will say it's actually better for things to be managed locally.
Managed, yes.
They understand how to reach people, what people need to get the information they need, and the local resources. But the issue is, because FEMA has gotten so big for so long and natural disasters are only getting so much more extreme, it's really difficult to figure out exactly when they would make that pivot, Kelly. And so for now, there was some behind-the-scenes maneuvering to try to keep a lot of those on-the-ground responders on the paybooks, on the payrolls, but it is clear that FEMA is still a priority to be all but eliminated, actually eliminated under this administration.
Yes.
That's still the plan.
And that may be part of the reason we have an acting, you made a reference to acting administrator right now, not a permanent position. Do you think that is having an impact on how they just organize themselves, how they carry out the mission as it stands right now?
Yeah, and perhaps it sends a chilling effect of how the other administrator was fired. This is someone who was polygraphed. This is someone who was obviously taken out for going up against this idea of eliminating FEMA. You have David Richardson now, who did not have any FEMA experience, but who at least has been rallying to keep the part of the workforce that they do have. The other thing I'll point to, Kelly, is how much this administration sees DHS as an immigration agency, and that they have now promised $450 in FEMA funds to go repay Florida for building Alligator Alcatraz. Now, that does come from a sheltering part of their budget that was used for immigrants in the past, but still, that's money FEMA could pull from if they have a very catastrophic hurricane season, floods like this, wildfires like we saw in Los Angeles. It's all part of the same coffer, and right now, DHS sees immigration as its #1 funding priority.
That's very clear based on their actions and what they talk about. It'll be interesting to see how this may shape some policy decisions, and also hearing from governors. Governor Abbott is a Republican, and obviously they are well positioned to do state-level response, but they often, many times we see governors very quick, the moment a crisis happens, to reach out and have the federal government assist.
And Texas is a big state. If this happens in smaller areas with less resources, they might not be as equipped to handle it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all your reporting on that.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.